So hello everybody, I'm Dr. Giles Hooper and I'm a senior lecturer in music. My main interests and teaching responsibilities concern music in audiovisual media, especially film and video games. Now if you have attended a previous open day, you will almost certainly have had my session on the film music of John Williams. So for this additional sample session, I wanted to talk briefly about my other interest, music in video games. And just to say that normally if I'm teaching online in a live context through MS Teams or Zoom, I obviously share my screen and audio, here a PowerPoint presentation, and students can then see me throughout the whole session in a different part of the MS Teams or Zoom application, that is to say not getting in the way of the slides. And students obviously want ideally to see me during the live session, and this also allows for interaction such as feedback, questions, live polls, live surveys, text chat, and all of those kinds of things. As this is a pre-recorded sample, I won't be appearing on most subsequent slides, although I will of course be talking through them. So most of you will probably have played a video game at some point. Some of you may play video games very frequently. Some of you may deny that you play video games, even though in reality you do. For example, perhaps on an app on a mobile phone. But let's think about cutscenes. So what is a cutscene? Well, if you think about it, video games are overwhelmingly an interactive medium. You are constantly interacting with the game through your inputs and it is responding to you, and so on. So cutscenes are moments in games where essentially control is taken away from you, the player, and a pre-rendered scene plays instead. And this can be realized in a number of different ways. Perhaps one of the best ways of demonstrating what a cutscene is to provide a couple of examples. And these are also interesting because they give us an insight into just how significantly video games have developed over the last 3 decades or more. And so one of the first cutscenes that some people identify is this little thing that appeared in Pac-Man, the original arcade game. And then we might compare that to this cutscene which appears at the very end of The Last of Us, originally released on PlayStation 3.
I struggled for a long time with surviving. And no matter what, you keep finding something to fight for. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
However, cutscenes do remain a point of significant disagreement actually among both gamers and critics alike. So for example, we have stories are just uninteresting ornaments or gift wrappings to games, and laying any emphasis on studying these kinds of marketing tools is just a waste of time and energy. Or similarly, cutscenes may also interrupt the middle of levels at particularly significant moments. And these are often two of the main criticisms of cutscenes, that they take the player away from interacting with the game, they interrupt the game in different ways. However, there are, of course, more positive perspectives on this. Many of the most memorable emotional moments I as a gamer come to remember have happened in front of my eyes when I had lost the control of the action through a triggered cutscene of varying length. Or a cutscene does not cut off gameplay, but rather is an integral part of the configurative experience. And what we're really dealing with here are two fundamentally different conceptions of what a game is, and in a way how we should interpret a video game. One, typically referred to as narratology, emphasizes and focuses on the relevance of narrative, often drawing on literary theory. And you can see why, for example, story-enhancing cutscenes would be treated more favorably within that conception of a game. And on the other hand, ludology, which emphasizes and focuses on the relevance of gameplay, game structure and game rules. And of course you can see why cutscenes would be treated much less favorably in that particular conception of a game. So of course one important aspect of video games, and indeed the role of music in video games, is to help shape a sense of character, to help the player identify with a character. And so for that purpose I've chosen one of the most famous video games of all time, Final Fantasy VII, and the character Aerith. So first of all we can think about Aerith's theme, as it's known, and here, without too much touching up, I've simply imported the original MIDI file into Sibelius. And of course, so it's a MIDI realized theme, and it goes like this. Okay, and in a way this theme articulates an important duality really on multiple levels. So the first four measures gently undulate between a kind of muted tonic and a minor 5 chord, minor dominant. Muted insofar as one, the tonic is clouded by the suspended second, the E, and the minor 5 is realized in second inversion. And the consequent phrase is marginally more dynamic, with inner voice motion, the transfer of 5 to root position, and the ascending motive against the tonic is answered by the descending motion against minor 5. And in that sense, Aerith is both the symbol of hope and purity, and also, spoiler alert, the victim of a seemingly arbitrary fate. And so this is a duality reflected by this piquant alternation between ascending major and descending minor. And we can see this in the following scene. Now, interestingly, having been introduced to this central character and her musical theme, we then have one of the more memorable, and in fact at the time and still one of the most strikingly unexpected moments. So a major spoiler alert here. And so just after Sephiroth kills Aerith, we have this boss battle. But notice something about the music. So what's striking about the use of this theme during the death scene is that it continues into, throughout and beyond the subsequent battle scene with Jenova Life, a particular iteration of the repeatedly encountered boss enemy. And so in one of very few battles to emit the standard role-playing game post-win victory pose triumphant fanfare, the fight with this poignantly named Life version of Jenova is imbued with the fact of Aerith's death, by virtue of the uninterrupted continuation of her musical theme, and rather than a dramatic high point, the boss battle itself is rendered contextually secondary by the music. And then finally, returning to the cutscene, we have that moment. And actually, that moment, one of the most famous moments in video game history, and even today hundreds, thousands of players who played that game for the first time report that it was the first time that a game actually moved them potentially to tears. And of course all of that is done not only through the cutscene, but precisely through the use of the music. Now, of course, video games are still seen by many to be merely a form of entertainment, to be something actually quite trivial, perhaps even adolescent. But the truth is that for some time now, there have been games that deal with far more serious and weightier issues, and often deal with issues that raise ethical and moral questions. And of course, music can itself play a role in steering, in determining, in commenting on the kind of ethical and moral decisions that we make when playing a game. So as Gibbons says, and here he is talking about the cult classic PlayStation 2 release, Shadow of the Colossus, and he says, in the end, the music has been lying all along, abetting as players commit these acts of questionable morality, discouraging them from dwelling too long on the question. But the game's use of silence allows space for us to ask questions. It gives us the unusual opportunity to ask questions and reflect on the meaning of our actions. And we can see that here. So if we first consider the scene in which the player, the protagonist, approaches the first of these colossi. So here we have typical boss music, minor key, ominous, suggesting that this creature, this colossus, is a threat and the enemy to be slain. But then look what happens, or listen to what happens when we finally vanquish this beast. And so this is anything but the typical triumphant climax to defeating a boss in a video game. Instead, the music takes very much the other direction, almost religious, almost sacred, the addition of amorphous choral voices. And in a way, what the music is doing here is actually from very early on in the game, the music itself is beginning to ask us to question why we are doing what we are doing within the game. In other words, yet again, and in a cutscene, the music is reframing and potentially changing the way that we view the game and the way that we reflect on our actions. And reflection is something that can often be induced by music through a technique known as affective incongruence. And this is where the music, in a sense, almost signposts the fact that it is stepping back from the action. Burnt and Hartman once suggested that the only established functions of music in games are those providing the feeling of immersion into the scenario and a superficial dramatization of action scenes. Hence, interactive media are far behind their possibilities and even behind ancestors. Especially the contrapuntal functions seem completely unknown to game developers. And what they are arguing here is that you typically don't find in games precisely that use of music that I just referred to, effective juxtaposition. And you see this in many films. You see it, for example, in the opening scene, towards the end of the battle scene that opens Ridley Scott's Gladiator, okay, composed by Hans Zimmer. You see it in a lot of Stanley Kubrick films. You see it in Tarantino films. Okay, and what they are arguing is that you generally don't find this in video games. But I would perhaps dispute that particular argument. So this is a cutscene from Gears of War 3, an Xbox 360 release. Again, just as with Final Fantasy VII, major spoiler alert coming up.
Marcus! He's gone! He's gone! There's nothing you can do! Stop
Get
it!
off me! God
Stop
damn it!
it!
Let me get him out of there!
It's okay, Marcus. It's okay. Come on. We gotta go now. Your father still needs us.
No.
And so actually quite a complex sequence, and the cutscene depicting this action as Dom drives his explosives laden vehicle into the enemies and the resulting explosion and carnage are depicted in pseudo slow motion. All of this is accompanied by a soft instrumental version piano, then with the addition of synthesized string of Mad World, originally by Tears for Fears, but here a kind of instrumental version of the Gary Jules and Michael Andrews cover version, which also accompanied the final montage in the film Donnie Darko, which the game developers cited as among one of their favourites. Now, of course, the intensity of that intertextual resonance will depend on the awareness of the player. Some will recognise it as the conclusion to Donnie Darko, some will recognise the song as Mad World, rendering a rather poignant lyrical commentary on the conflict inherent to this war-based video game. Others, of course, may make neither connection. However, even in the case of the latter, it is that effective, incongruent juxtaposition between music and action that actually remains effective and the most affecting element in that sequence. And of course, one final thing that cutscenes can do especially is to provide narrative and emotional closure at the end of a video game. So, as O'Grady says, cutscenes may in fact warrant reconsideration for their ability to reconcile temporal disunities that would otherwise overthrow a player's sense of interactive control and ultimately her sense of being in the game world. And so finally, this is the final cutscene at the end of Mass Effect 3. so, as this climactic and dramatic sequence unfolds, it is, however, certainly at the beginning, accompanied by the soft, slow-tempo, pianistic track An End Once and For All, an original composition for the game by Clint Mansell. The piece is clearly located in the sound world of, for example, Einaudi. Non-functional harmony here centered around an E-Dorian scale set. Triadic identity is dampened by the addition of seconds and sixths, with a single chromatic inflection sneaking in twice within the opening 20 bars, and the repetition and developing variation of a very sparse arpeggiated motivic texture. And yet the formally incongruent music here serves actually three functions. Firstly, it conjoins visual flashbacks with musical flashbacks, the ascending descending fifth motive, which makes its first appearance in bar 13. Secondly, it provides an aural continuity, a musical pedal, suturing the cross-cutting visual shots and lending a kind of summative feel to the temporally and physically disjunctive physical cues. And thirdly, most importantly, it serves to retrospectively reframe the game that has just been completed. So, I would suggest that cutscenes and their music can serve to frame and contextualize a game and our experience of it, that they can develop character and assist our identification, including emotional identification with a character, that they can question or comment on our ethical choice as players, as gamers, even if at times the game compels us to undertake those actions. They can compel reflection, and they can provide narrative and emotional closure. So I propose that cutscenes are significantly more integral to the gameplay experience than critics sometimes imply, that rather than being separate from gameplay, they can be central to contextualizing and rendering meaningful the ludic interactions that nevertheless comprise most of a game, and crucially, that music, of all things, is often the under-acknowledged element in these under-acknowledged components of the often under-acknowledged video game experience. Thank you very much.